Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm welcome to Deep Thoughts, excuse me. Today is a little bit windy, which kind of sucks because it wasn't windy earlier today. There's obviously no clouds in the sky, which is great. I was listening back to the episode that I did with my buddy Dave on cigars, and I'm going to encourage him to redo that with me at a future time, because it's just been a while since I did anything interviewee, and it was sort of spur of the moment, and I don't think I did a very good job personally. Like, he did a much better job at times. But what I'm going to do is actually cover cigars where it is trivial in a dedicated episode here, and then we will allow a specialty show to kind of go a little bit deeper into personal opinions and that sort of thing. Before I get started into the basics of cigars, just one of the overviews of it is that, you know, it depends on how you grew up around them. I think the kids today grow up not around them at all, but it was still pretty rare for me even in the 70s. There was a dude who worked for my grandfather who at one point in time owned a dealership where he sold Dodges. He sold Dodge and Chryslers. But he had an employee named Perry. And it's a big black guy. And I remember he was just this wise soul, man. He was dressed sort of like a 30s, you know, where he had sort of a nice outfit on all the time with his hat on. My grandfather dressed the same way. But he always had a little tiny cigar in his mouth, like John Belushi. And I knew nothing about it, didn't ask any questions about it, but the guy always smelled like... And he always had chiclet gum, because before he would step up to a client to sell them something, he'd chew on a few little pieces of gum, probably freshen up his breath. So he always slipped me the chiclets, you know, which I loved. He seemed like he was 9 feet tall. I have no idea how big the guy was, but he's just a big sweet soul. So that was my first exposure to this, and then really the second time I ever got exposed to it was when I smoked my first one, and I was a kid who was smoking cigarettes at the time. About between the age of 8 and 11 I smoked cigarettes like a normal adult, as much as I could get a hold of them. Lucky Strike and Pall Mall Super Long non-filters. The very tail end I got into Winston filters, and that was a weird experience for just a very short period of time. But when I got a hold of my first cigar, I puffed on it and I turned purple probably. But all of us were taking turns with this cigar. I don't even know who the hell got the damn thing, but we're inhaling it and we're getting sick fast because it's displacing our blood sugar levels. So let me dispel a few myths about my approach to cigars. I don't smoke to be macho. I don't smoke to be a man, necessarily. I don't think I necessarily look cool smoking a cigar. That's like one of the dumbest things you could think. There's an extremely interesting history behind cigars. Obviously, the Native Americans and people in South America were rumored to have been doing this. Again, Native Americans for sure. Further south, the history gets a little bit sketchy. But when the settlers came over from Europe for probably the 10th time, they found a whole culture here rolling up tobacco leaves and sticking them up their noses, puffing on them, super long sticks. And I'm sure that they knew back in the day that smoking tobacco made you mellow. It really mellows you out. I don't know if they inhaled it or not. I assume so, but I know not a single individual that inhales cigars. I meet guys that seem to be full of shit who say they inhale cigars. Meaning they kind of have a bunch of other tall tales to tell, and it's seemingly it's really funny. The guys that say they inhale cigars, and there are a few, I know a few guys that can do it, but they're burly golems, But the guys that flip into it and say, oh yeah, of course I do, or I used to, or whatever, they just have a lot of other things that they knee-jerk into, which I don't think are true. And I don't think they have done it because they think they can lie about it. If you inhaled a cigar, you would be on your back fast. So what's interesting about cigars is that for those of you who can appreciate a fine wine, you might look at a cigar, if you've never been around them or smoked them, and think, God, these are filthy, filthy things. And just think about it. It's 20 times more intense than a cigarette. Because I heard that one cigar has as much tobacco in it as a whole pack of cigarettes, and there's 20 cigarettes in a pack. I used to believe that too. But there's nothing closer to a fine wine in terms of tobacco use than a cigar. The same exact principles apply to a cigar that apply to fine wine. Each year, a wine crop, or I should say a grape crop, grows and either has a good crop or a bad crop. Same thing with tobacco. You either get a good year or you get a bad year. Now, just like wine, they will sell you the crappy crop. They have no choice but to sell it, perhaps at a discount. With tobacco, well, they may choose to sell off a bad batch of leaves off to another reseller who might be able to use that flavor profile to build the cigar that tastes like what they're famous for, but a lot of times they'll just go into crappier cigars. But we're going to get into all this. A cigar and a cigarette is almost a complete opposite object from each other. Cigarettes are made out of paper that has been soaked in a goopy soup of tobacco and, again, as I've always heard it described to me by the Anti-Smoking League, and I couldn't name these if I tried, and I've never had them named to me. But when I was a kid and they were really against smoking, they said that cigarettes have had 1,200 to 1,500 chemicals added to them for preservative reasons, addiction reasons, sitting on the shelf and not going stale. All these different things. Don't know if that's true, but it's a shit ton of weird stuff. When you pick up a cigarette and you look at it, you look down the barrel and you see brown shavings inside. That's not tobacco. I mean, you're looking at a little bit of tobacco, but you're looking at sort of a dusty gravy of tobacco on top of paper or cardboard. There are some cigarettes that have literally the paper classification of cardboard inside the center. Now the outer is obviously, nice zigzaggy wraps that makes it nice and light and dainty. If you have a filter on your cigarette, then you have something tantamount to compressed insulation, slightly more refined than the stuff that's in the roof or the attic of your house, but damn near the same. A sort of fiberglass mesh that is to catch the carcinogens and the clouds that go into your throat, the bad stuff. So what they teach you. What ends up happening is that you suck all the fibers down, not all of them, but a trace amount of those fibers down into your lungs, which essentially cut you on a microscopic level. And then you put the sludge down in your lungs because you're inhaling the cigarette, which again, you're only smoking a tiny percentage of actual tobacco. If you've ever done studies, for fast food restaurants and how much actual beef they have in their food, and you find out it's like around 11% beef in a Taco Bell taco, and the rest is all a bunch of weird shit, that's probably how you should view a cigarette as well. But this cigar right here, the Drew Estate Herrera Esteli, which is one of my favorite cigars of all time, below $15, it's 100% tobacco. The tobacco has been grown and handled and fermented just like wine within reason. I mean, we don't put it inside a 5-gallon jug with a bunch of other sugars and stuff, but it's laid out, it's wetted down, and it's dried, and it's hung, and then it's compressed, it's picked, and it's sorted, and it's compressed into big giant bales, and they wrap it up in these bales, and then they wash it down with all kinds of water, and there's one other thing, I can't remember exactly what it is, but do all kinds of wild fermentation, put it inside these warehouses where then it gets time to sit, and they pull it out, they create these big giant piles, and then they rotate the piles. I mean, it is incredible. This cigar, as I am told, has had at least 300 people touch it. And unless the cigar is machine made, that's true for almost all cigars. You haven't had 300 people touch a wine. So tell me which one's more nostalgic, which one is more of a creation of mankind. It's sitting right here in my hand, right? Now, cigars are very different from various brands and various price brackets in various regions of the world. Cuban cigars are completely and utterly different than all other cigars on planet Earth, which makes it almost unfathomably amazing that they are so different. Every other cigar is called a New World cigar. It's non-Cuban. It's all over the place. You can get Cameroon wrappers made in Africa. You can get Connecticut wrappers made in America, filler all over the world, and we'll get to the anatomy here shortly. The history behind any one blend of cigar, unless it's some brand new blend, can go back a couple hundred years. So you can see a cigar released today. This is 1926 on it. And it's not that the cigar was made in 1926, unless you're paying about $300 or $400 for that stick. What they've done is they've gone back and they've read the recipe, the blend for the 1926, and they have reblended it for you so you can taste it today. Now, who knows? They do keep old cigars around forever, so you could have a blender smoke an old 26, taste it, feel it out, use the tobacco today to simulate that flavor. But it would be just like trying to create a bouquet from a red, Cabernet Sauvignon. It's like a 1913 Cabernet, and someone has to pop the cork, taste it, and kind of go, oh, okay, that's that vintage. Well, okay, so so-and-so's crop blended together with that crop will make this taste. Blenders are some of the most brilliant, or I should say creative and talented people that can memorize things and figure how things combine. They do alchemy in their brain, right? Well, let's get into how a cigar is created in terms of after all of the steps of fermenting the tobacco. The tobacco is divided up into several different groups for its shade, its color, if it's going to become a wrapper on the outside. On the inside, it is deveined. You see a leaf, it's got a sort of a thread that goes down the center. Typically, the vein has been pulled out. If it gains any level of, notoriety in the leaf, where it's going to disrupt the rolling process. But a blender will take all kinds of different crops from the manufacturer, the grower, that they have access to. And so imagine someone says, well, we have 8 different blends coming in from the fields this year, minus the wrapper, which is grown completely separate. And so the blender will sit there and decide the proportions, just like mixing a drink. This much of this leaf, this much of that leaf. One might be a very sharp tasting leaf, and so that's put in there sparingly, where others have a very heavy, good foundational tobacco flavor. But they have so many different flavors, it's ridiculous. They've got sort of your beanie vanilla, your beanie coffee. They have leather flavors and wood flavors and hay flavors, straight up tobacco flavors, tarry tobacco, light tobacco. It's really, I can't say limitless, but it'll keep you busy for several years if you're trying to learn the profile of a bunch of different cigars. Once the blender figures out the proportions, they teach all the rollers what proportions they need to use to create the cigar of that year, of that particular vintage. They're usually in a warehouse. They sit at little tables surrounded by tobacco leaves, bundles and bundles of different flavors, right? Usually it isn't all one flavor, but sometimes those sticks exist too. Again, Most of the time when the leaf gets to the roller, it's been deveined and it's ready to rock and roll. Sometimes they've got to, do a little bit of cleanup on the leaf to make sure that it's going to roll up beautifully. The deveining of the leaf is really important because it controls the flow of air through the cigar, which we'll get to after we talk about how it's put together. But imagine a stick inside a cigar. You put it up to your mouth, you pull on it, and you don't get any air through it. And that's this huge bummer. Because you buy these things at the store, you pay your money, you leave, you drive home, and even if you figure out, it's got a block in it, you may have a store that's sympathetic to a block, and you may not. But regardless, you've driven home. And so unless it's easy to get back there, you won't have a good experience. So after all the leaves internally are prepared, cleaned up, you're never going to see it. You're going to burn it. You're going to taste it. The roller rolls up the first bundle of leaves, so it'll be the center core, the filler. And then you have to hold it into that shape, right? Whatever gauge you're going to do. Now, the ring gauge of a cigar is essentially like the ring gauge you might have if you were to buy a ring like this was your finger. And so we measure, I believe, in circumference of millimeters. So, for instance, a ridiculously large gauge would be 60 gauge. A normal gauge might be anywhere from a 48 to a 52 gauge. But 58 starts getting really intense. The thicker the gauge of cigar really doesn't mean a hell of a lot. You'll pay more money for it because you're actually packing a lot more tobacco inside the cigar. But just remember, this ash is going to burn the same exact speed it would burn regardless of how thick your cigar is. And so some tobacco burns slow, some tobacco burns fast, right? So as I've had it communicated to me, the binder, which you do not see, the binder is underneath this outer coating, which is we call the wrapper. It's usually a fairly hardy leaf that is part of the filler. And it holds the cigar into shape. And so what happens is they've got these leaves all cranked up in the center, and they have to do it very carefully not to create blockage and not to create a tunnel where, if you were to look down the center of a paper towel, well, you got a bunch of stuff wrapped around the outside, but there's the hole down the middle that we use to hold up the paper towels. Well, sometimes that can naturally happen anytime you take something like a leaf and roll it up. If you get a hole down the center, they call that a tunnel, and that will allow a tremendous amount of oxygen to go down the center of the cigar, which will utterly and completely destroy the smoking experience because it'll burn down the center faster than it burns on the outside, which means your stick can be way done before you are done with it. It can burn literally in a few minutes as opposed to a couple hours, right? So once they get that core blend worked out, they put the wrapper down, they roll the whole thing inside the wrapper, and they've got this little mold that they can actually push it into. Now, not everyone uses the mold, but most of them do, where they push it into the mold, which has the ring gauge reinforced. We are rolling a 54 gauge cigar today, is what they might say, and so you've got to get it to be this exact diameter, and you also have to have it this exact length because they're rolling a particular size. Once they have it all together, I think they let it sit for a little while. They roll a bunch of them without wrappers. This is just a single person wrapping, and then the way I've seen it done several different ways, but the wrapper leaf is extremely special. It is grown outside of usually direct sunlight. There are a couple exceptions in the world, but usually it's just a very delicate leaf. It gets a little bit bigger, and it is the most expensive leaf that they make because of cosmetic reasons, not usually due to taste reasons. There's this big debate kind of going on as to whether or not wrappers taste at all, because there's certain manufacturers that think that wrappers have no taste at all. And it would seem that a wrapper wouldn't be able to influence the taste of a cigar too much because it's so small. It's such a small portion of the actual tobacco. Because the inner core and the binder are all made of the same thing. You're talking about a 98% flavor profile for the binder and the filler, and then just this tiny 2% that goes around the outside. But again, it's chosen because it is absolutely beautiful. It goes around the outside, and then you have a cigar with two openings. before you close it off. And so one end gets arbitrarily picked to be the open, and there's this guillotine thing that they use to cut it down, make it perfect. But then the backside is where the last part of the training is for a cigar roller, which is to put the caps on the end. And caps are just little tiny circular pieces of tobacco, and it is really the most fascinating thing because they can roll a cigar extremely fast. You know, just like anyone in a human in an assembly line learns all the tricks of the trade. But when it comes to these wrappers, you see them slow down and just put this thing on there, and they're still very quick. I mean, it would take us probably 10 minutes having never done it before, but these pros get in there and boy, they just tap, 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 and it's pretty amazing. But there are cigar brands that put a single cap on there, and they're usually so small you can barely see them. This one has a triple cap. And that you just look at it, and you just see. I can see 3, circles around the end of this cigar, which means it's a triple cap. And then they put it back in the mold, push it down, guillotine off the top, make sure it's good. There's people down the assembly line which will check the color of the cigar wrapper. Now, there's Herrera Stellis that are of all different shapes and shouldn't say shapes, but shades, excuse me. And what they try to do is when you buy a box, they don't want you to get a bunch of mixed shades, so you're worried about, the integrity of your cigar. So they tend to just pick them all out in different shades, and they'll put like a darker group of cigars in one box, slightly lighter in another box, but that just keeps a congruent thought when you open up the box that you didn't get a bunch of weird random flavors. But again, I don't think the wrapper influences the taste as much as I previously thought. Obviously, it comes with a band, and that's what we call a little wrapper on the outside of the wrapper. The bands are obviously, first and foremost, just to identify where you got the cigar, maybe some designations of its style, its name, whatever they want to put on there. There's a bunch of rumors carried forward from the days of old that that the bands were actually designed to keep the oils from your finger touching the cigar in a way that would perhaps affect its burn. I don't think that's the slightest bit true. Unless, of course, we didn't bathe back in the day, and so you needed something to keep the oil of your fingers off of your cigar. But cigars are based on 2 things, tobacco and fire. And your oils from your hands aren't going to stop fire from burning a cigar, right? Unless you're just dripping wet. So just to review, the blend is where you have the filler. It is the core flavor of the cigar. One of those leaves is typically elected to be the binder, which is the thing underneath this wrapper that you can see that holds it together. And the wrapper is merely a cosmetic leaf on the outside to give it its beauty. And then the caps go on the end. They're also made of the wrapper. And you pretty much have a cigar once you put a band on the outside. Now, you may have heard, or you may not have heard, there's 2 different types of fillers in the world. Short filler and long filler. It is as simple as what it sounds like. The filler that is long filler is usually a big, long leaf. A short filler is usually the scraps that come off of the big leaves as they're cutting them up to make a perfect cigar. And I don't have really any knowledge about why they make the certain cuts that they do. They have this beautiful circular knife, which I don't even know what you would say besides it almost looks like a dish that's been turned into a knife. But they're always trimming off a little bit here, a little bit there. Now, the difference between a short filler and a long filler is that in short filler, it can be little tiny chopped up pieces, and I mean just the size of a postage stamp. It can be 2 or 3 inches. But because there's more space in there due to the fact that there's shreds of tobacco, it burns faster. And so a short filler burns faster. It has a shorter lifespan, coincidentally. All right? But what I want you to understand is that the size of a cigar has very little to do with how long it's going to last when you smoke it. I can smoke a normal Robusto, which is sort of a typical size cigar, for 2 hours, easy, sometimes. If it's a Cohiba, Cuban cigar. I can smoke a cigar that's the size of this which I think is a Toro, and it'll last 45 minutes because it's all short filler. The experience between a long filler and a short filler is typically pretty obvious in that the higher quality experience will be in the long filler. And that sounds maybe illogical because, hey, tobacco's tobacco. Even if it burned a little quickly or quicker, what would be the problem with the actual taste of the experience? And I'm going to tell you that the way that we smoke cigars and the way that we nurture them through the burning process affects greatly, I think, the flavor profile on your tongue, because you're getting things burned into your mouth either slow or fast. There's all kinds of foods that you eat. If you eat them really quickly, it almost tastes different. It's like if you smell a skunk who's down the street, it stinks to high heaven. But if you get one that crawls under your house, it almost smells sweet, as it's giving you a massive headache, right? Now, in terms of, because I'm going to bounce around some of the facts here to kind of spread this out. In terms of smoking a cigar to taste it, the best description I've ever heard, I think might have been Brian Glenn from Cigar Obsession. I'm not quite sure. But the idea was you're going to pull on the cigar. And pull just means suck on it, right? You're pulling air from the front to the back. The pull is measured in how much effort does it take to pull air through a cigar. If you are pulling really, really hard to get anything to come through your cigar, then you might have a block cigar. And what you'll find with the block cigar that's still kind of functional is that you will bust a lot of capillaries in your mouth. Like you'll feel that tingly sensation like you've been popped in the face or something. And you kind of taste irony blood because you've been pulling so hard on your cheekbones, on your cheek flesh, that it's a little bit weird. Now, that's a pretty rare occasion. Last time I had this was a Vegas cigar, and it was just utterly painful. It's like smoking a really thick sponge. Typically, the pull that you want is a pretty effortless pull. Now, again, if you pull on it, it almost feels like you're just sucking on a straw, then someone probably rolled a tunnel down the center of your cigar, and you're going to have a bad smoke no matter how you adjust it. But a block, like I said, is a couple different things that usually happens. Most of the time, it's a stem that didn't get pulled out of the leaf before it was rolled into filler. If you get a stem, you can do a few things. Or the other way it gets blocked is that they simply crimp the leaf so tight. Someone creates like a knot. When you take a chamois and you really twist it, it's really hard. Well, they can do that to a leaf, and you can't get through it. You can't get any air past that little twist. That is, in my opinion, sort of the worst block, because without a tool to cut through it, to open that back up, you're going to have an issue. And there's a tool called a perfect draw, which you can find online, and it's essentially a metal wire, as a metal rod about 6 inches long, and it has some teeth on the end, very intense teeth that you can push it in, but it's barbed not to go back the other way. And so when you want to unblock your stick, you push in the stick, and you got to keep rotating it so you can keep it centered down the center, because otherwise you can come out the side of your cigar and you've completely destroyed it until you can maybe use perfect repair, which is a bottle of the glue that they use to put the caps on, which is a vegetable oil with adhesive, and you can kind of make it go down. But at that point, you really have jostled up the interior of the cigar. But what you can do is you can feel the cigar, and you can feel a hard spot, typically, where that stick is, where that twist is. And at that point, again, if it's close to the band, close to your mouth, you can push a perfect draw in there, and you push it in straight, and then you rip it out, and it yanks a bunch of the tobacco out on the barbs. And that typically will grab either the vein, or it will break the vein in such a way you can get air through. If it's a twist, it'll typically just pull out a whole lot of tobacco, and that'll get you back on your feet. If that does not work, we're gonna show you my guillotine here. My dad got me. This is a guillotine cutter. It works just like the old French guillotines. and you just put your cigar in there and you cut it down. The other one is a punch, which is what I use today. You can get them on your keychains, and what I did was I created a hole right down the center of the cigar. A punch is you just push it in. It's a little cookie cutter, exactly like a cookie cutter, but it's about a 1/4 inch circle. You push it in, you turn it, you pull it out, and there's a little bit of the tobacco missing, which opens it up. With a guillotine, when you're opening it, and we'll get to unblocking here in a second, the key is this, because nobody taught me this, and this will really help you out. Regardless if you have 1, 2, or 3 caps, the only cap you need to take off to get smoking is the last cap. So when you have a guillotine cutter, you open it up, you put the cigar in there, and you just put enough in that the first cap is going to get nipped off. Even if your cutter isn't sharp enough and you kind of just graze it and the cap comes off and it doesn't look that pretty, pull on it, you'll find out it's wide open and you're ready to go. The ends of cigars don't have to be pretty, the ones that you're smoking from, right? Now, let's say that this cigar was blocked right from the very beginning. I've never had a Herrera Esteli ever be blocked, and there's nothing you can do. You don't own a perfect draw, or you use the perfect draw and nothing worked out. The best thing you can do to save your money is to get a guillotine cutter, and you can, after lighting it, you can actually put the whole cigar through the guillotine like this, and you cut the cigar directly in half. One side's going to smoke, almost guarantee you. It's going to smoke perfectly. For the one that didn't smoke well, you now only have a half a cigar, so your perfect draw tool will almost go completely through that other half. So you can do that a couple times, see if you can't free it up. If you don't have a perfect draw, and you don't have anything that's kind of pokey that you can put in there, be careful, don't poke yourself, you can take the guillotine and cut it one more time and smoke the other half. Just realize the shorter a cigar gets, the hotter it gets, because this fire, which has a little cherry kernel in it, is going towards your mouth. The closer that gets to your mouth, the more tobacco you're going to taste, the more heat you're going to have on your tongue, and you're going to go from a cold draw on the first half of your cigar down to a really powerful, almost tarish tobacco. Now, lighting a cigar has a religion, and there's all kinds of religions on how to light a cigar. What no one told me until really late was the Cubans just use Bic lighters. They don't give a shit. They invented cigars. They just flick them, boom, 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 and they just light up one side and it burns okay. No big deal. I've never seen them correct a cigar, but we'll get into that one second. Today in America, what we do is we use these butane lighters that blow out a really intense flame, or 2 or 3 flames, or even 4 flames, because you can't sit around all day usually nurturing the end of your cigar. You want the whole thing to light at once, and then you can start smoking. But they figured out very quickly, when just totally firing up the end of a cigar, some anomalies happen which are very costly half the time. If you blast a flame right down the center of the cigar, you will light the center of the cigar more than you light the outer edge. When that occurs, you have something called tunneling due to fire. The cigars roll fine, but you've started a flame that goes right down the center faster than the flame that's going on the outside. And so you can burn up the inside of your cigar too quickly. So in order to avoid this, what we want to create is a cone that points up. We want the outer edges to burn first and the center to catch up last. If you ash, you should have a cone. If you're doing it right now, I'm ashing a little quickly on this one, but Herrera Estelis always burn beautifully. So what a lot of us do is we use butane lighters with one flame. This little cheapy lighter I bought from my smoke shop, even though it looks massive, it only has one flame out the front. What you do is you take the cigar and you draw a circle like a hula hoop around the outer edge. You get the whole outer edge of the front of the cigar red. What you don't want to do is put it directly down the barrel of the cigar, because you're paying for every ounce of this tobacco. Why burn it up too quickly? So we typically glance it off at an angle. So we just want to glance it off, and you can rotate the cigar. Most of the time we rotate the lighter. We go in a circle. If you watch a lot of my old shows, you'll see me doing this circle all the time. Once you get a ring of fire going on there, you then pull it up, and then you might hit it diagonally down the middle and you're sucking in air, which gets the cherry on the very tip just barely lit. And that way the outer ring is going down faster than the inner core, and you will develop a beautiful cherry that will balance itself out, and you'll get this nugget of fire, sort of at the razor point of the burn. Now the razor reference is, if you take a cigar and you turn it, you can see that the flame is going down the cigar at different rates, right? Mine is burning just a tad bit wonky, if you can see that, right? But overall, Herrera still catches up. I'm also smoking on a fairly windy day, which sucks. Windy days suck for a couple reasons. Let's say a bunch of wind is coming at my face. Well, whatever side of the cigar is facing the wind, it's going to get, it's just like if I blew on a fire, you know, it gets hotter. So it'll burn down one side of your cigar faster than the other. That's what when you get canoeing. If you hold your cigar like this, it's burned out the top. The bottom is perfectly fine, and you basically are making a canoe out of fire. The other one is called tunneling, which I said, which is burning right down the center. The other one is that the smoke coming off the end here is what we call the foot smoke. It's some of the most beautiful smoke you can smell, and this is where we think that the wrapper has a beautiful kind of tone to it, a smell to it, right? You want to smell it. You're paying for it, right? That's why smoke lounges are really fun, because you're inside. Not only are you smoking your stick, but a guy can sit right next to you and fire up a $60 stick. And even though you're not tasting it, you're smelling it. You're smelling the secondhand smoke from his thing. And again, it's not cigarette secondhand smoke, which is full of a bunch of sticky, horrible shit, right? But now, I'm going to show you a little bit of an error here. I'm going to rotate this, and you're going to see about right there in the video. If you're on audio, it's about almost a 1/4 inch too high on one side. Now this will actually probably balance out, but I'm going to do what's called a correction. You get out this little guy here, and you just point it. I usually do it at an angle, and I just pop it. This thing's having a problem in the wind. And you'll see I've made it black. That black will then burn off in my next few inhales, my few next pulls, and you already see it turn gray. So now it's a little bit more even. That's what we call a correction. If this burns perfectly on all sides, you can rotate it and it just looks perfectly level. We call that a razor sharp burn. Yeah, so if you ever hear that, that's a compliment to the cigar and its composition. But I digressed a little too much too quickly there. How do you taste a cigar? Well, there's a couple things. If you just pull on a cigar and you blow the smoke out, again, you're not inhaling, it never goes down your throat. That's the thing. You might have a little bit of the mist and the smoke that kind of puts a resin on the inside of your mouth, which is very slow and mild, and you might swallow a little bit of that. That's going down to your digestive system, not on your lungs, right? Again, even if you breathe the secondhand smoke from this, it's just pure tobacco. Now, there's a law of particulates that says that human beings and all life shouldn't breathe anything that they don't use to sustain life, so there's a bit of a risk that if you were sick or allergic to tobacco, you could get yourself into a health issue. But the FDA has gone from saying you can smoke 6 cigars a day as long as you don't inhale, and you'll be fine, to 6 cigars if you do inhale, you'll have the first entry-level amount of cancer, but they're always changing that statistic. But how to taste a cigar. Here's what I was talking about before actually saying what it was. You're going to pull on this. You're going to have a cloud of smoke in your mouth. And you're just going to open your mouth and let it flow out of your mouth. So check this out. And then you lick the top of your mouth with your tongue. And like, again, the flavor on this cigar is utterly phenomenal, in my opinion. For a $15 stick, it's really like, it's probably about $15 with the new taxes we have here in California, but you can buy them online in boxes for a hell of a lot cheaper. It's a Drew Estate Herrera Steli. The other thing you can do is retrohale, which is you can pull it in and then you blow a little bit out your nose. Your nose has a whole separate game going on, and you can get all kinds of wild flavors inside your nose that you can't get just purely by licking your roof of your mouth with your tongue. The other thing is that cigars have at least 3 stages of taste in most regards, and we call those the thirds. So the first third of the cigar has one flavor, the second third has a different flavor, and the last third has its last flavor. Part of this sounds like magic, but when I really thought about it over the years, it's not magic at all. It's actually just the standard aging process of a cigar. When this is done being rolled, I got one side that's capped, one side that's wide open, and so I've got, regardless of how it's stored, there's oxygen going in the front, aging that tobacco differently than the stuff in the center, which is protected from both ends, as opposed to one at the very end, which hasn't had hardly any exposure to oxygen. The other thing is that the flame is going from the front of the cigar to the back of the cigar. So the amount of tobacco that you can actually get into your mouth, the whole cigar is acting like a filter the whole time you're smoking. So the closer that the cherry, the fire, gets to your mouth, the less filtering is going on. So a lot of people who are long-time smokers, as soon as they have to take the band off, they smoked about the base of the band, leaving about 1.5 inches, and they throw it away. And there's a reason for that. And typically it's only if you're sort of a veteran smoker do you do this, because when you're a beginner, you're paying $10 for a stick. You're going to smoke every damn inch of it, right? Down to like the point's burning your fingers. But in the first third of a cigar, what I have noticed, unless it's magical, is that you get sort of a more ashy flavor because it's sort of drier at the end. And that's usually lasts for about 1/2 inch to 1 inch tops. And then once you cross that first inch, you start to getting into tobacco that is less dry, and it starts having really sort of the profile that you're expecting if someone said to you, yes, it's got a really good vanilla bean flavor, or it's got a leather flavor, or whatever. That's when it starts kicking in for me. My favorite part of the cigar is the center third, because it is, for me, the most pristine version of what the roller meant to give to me, especially if it's humidified properly, which is usually about 69 degrees, or 69% humidified. It's usually the golden rule around the world. When you hit the last third, you got the cherry pretty close to your mouth, and that's when you start getting the heavier profile. It's whatever you were smoking, but way more intense. The last third is where you start to get that little bit of a loopy head feeling if you're not used to smoking cigars, or you happen to pick up on a really tough cigar. Now, having said that, there are cigars. There's a brand out there called New World. There's a very dark Maduro wrapper. It's almost like black as night. They're usually pretty small, but they will kick your ass in 1 inch. I have never been able to get to a halfway mark of a New World Maduro. It's just way too much. My buddy sold a box of them once, and I've never seen more almost full-length cigars sitting in ashtrays, sitting outside on the ground, because everyone was like, ugh. If you're smoking a cigar and you get high, here's what you do. You eat a piece of chocolate. You eat some sugar. You can even take a teaspoon of sugar, just a teeny tiny bit of sugar, put it on your tongue, drink it down with some water. You can even drink soda, although it's bad for your teeth and your body, and it will rehabilitate you in about a minute. 60 seconds, you will go from needing to hurl to being just fine. The big advice on the street is eat a meal before you smoke a cigar. I will tell you that sweet things that you eat before you smoke a cigar will really accent the sort of rustic flavors of tobacco. If you eat a big steak with butter and all that good stuff, it's almost a complimentary thing that you're going to be smoking a cigar. If you ever get slightly addicted to these, it will be because you're eating a meal and you know what the pairing, which they call you eating two things at once, will make you feel like. Some people I've seen actually eat dinner and keep a cigar on the table, which usually because they're eating in a patio or something. I have never eaten and spoken at the exact same time, to my knowledge. But the other way to cut open a cigar, which I neglected, was one of my favorite ways of doing it, which is called a V-cutter. And V-cutters are these, they look like guillotines, but they have a V-shaped blade in them. They also have a guide in them in such that you can just push the cigar against a V-cutter. It can't go through the cutter, so you actually could do it in the dark without being able to see anything, and you'll cut it perfectly every single time. I bought a $90 V-cutter 7 years ago, and it's still as sharp as it was the first day, it seems, today. I have not been able to keep a guillotine sharp for more than a year, ever. I'll keep them, but it's like scraping off the end of the cigar, right? The punches last a long time. I know guys that have punches on their keychains that are 25 years old that still punch it out, because it's just it's not very abrasive to the blade to cut open a cigar, because you're just poking this thing like a little cookie cutter. Now, in terms of what you're going to taste and what someone else says you're going to taste, well, they'll be about as accurate as your friend telling you how a peanut butter parfait tastes, or a steak of a certain type tastes, or a lobster tastes. You have preferences that are different than others. So if you find anyone that can give you tasting notes, is what they call them, that you agree with, hang on to that person, because they can do a lot of hard work for you, spending a ton of money on cigars, and they can find out whether or not one is good or bad. Now, one of the things they don't tell you about cigars, but they tell you about wine, and it just baffles me this information doesn't travel better, is that just like wine, where they have a good year of grapes and then a bad year of grapes, but it's the same vineyard, same thing goes for cigars, all right? The Herrera Estelis have been phenomenal for ages, but I'd say about 3 years ago, the tips, which are typically fairly ashy in all cigars, except for Cubans, which I'm going to get into on the end here, the tip of the cigar was actually really buttery. I mean, it tastes like a stick of butter coming through tobacco. Utterly phenomenal. It was like one of my favorite things about lighting up a Herrera Esteli was the last half inch. I don't know what was causing that. I don't know if it was the blend. I don't know if it was some weird humidification I was dealing with, but it was gorgeous. It doesn't happen right now, and that's all right. It changed, but still a great cigar. The Baccarats that I used to smoke. Baccarat is the cigar I'm holding in the thumbnail video of Season 1. It's a cheapy cigar. You can get it for about $3.50, but 5 years ago, you could get these sticks, and I guess probably 3 years ago too, you get the stick, and it was sweet. It was a sweet wrapper on the outside, so you put it on your lips, and it would taste like someone rolled it in some Jolly Rancher apple flavor. Wasn't that strong, but it was sort of like that flavor. Then the internals of the cigar, the filler of the old Baccarats, were just beautiful all the way to the last puff. Very light, but nice. Definitely a short filler. You get about 45 minutes to an hour out of one. I run my mouth a lot, so I get an hour out of almost anything. But about a year and a half later, it got reblended. Whatever their source tobacco was to get the Baccarat sticks started, they no longer have that tobacco anymore. And so now it is not sweet on the wrapper. And in the last 2 inches of the cigar, it is tarry and sort of, I think, intolerable. But then again, I've kind of upgraded my smoking habits quite a bit over the last year and a half, as I've been hanging out with guys that really know what they're talking about. Now, a couple things before we go into Cubans here. The color of the wrapper is not indicative of how strong it is. It can be indicative of how strong it is. You really have to ask the person, because again, the wrapper is just a tiny, tiny part of the flavor profile, but they typically kind of mix the really strong cigars with the darker wrappers just so you have some indication. But I smoke a lot of cigars that are damn near black, and they are just as light as this. In fact, some of them have very sweet wrappers. The 858 series sun-grown wrapper, or the natural wrapper from Fuente line, is really sweet, and it tastes like a cigar, but I mean, the wrapper is very sweet, and it doesn't hit me really bad. And this is where we're going to get into how you pick your cigar when you walk into a cigar shop. There is something called body, and there's something called strength. The body is the flavor. It is everything associated with flavor and nothing to do with how strong it's going to be on your blood sugar levels, right? The strength is the power of the tobacco, how much you're going to actually absorb when you're smoking, and that'll determine how loopy you get or lightheaded you get when you smoke. I do not know a single person that isn't a shop owner or a cigar expert that really longs for strong cigars. Strong cigars are for guys that have been smoking for a really long time that just need a kick. It's like a lot of you guys that get into really spicy food as you get older, because you're just simply tired of mild food. You want to have some kick. You want to have it to be almost like a challenge to eat the meal, right? Same thing with strong cigars. I do not like strong cigars. I think it's bullshit. I don't have any need to prove my manlyhood by getting sick, right? And what's funny is a lot of these guys who are very seasoned smokers, they will smoke those big cigars, but then they will report that they're sick and they didn't like the experience, and they will have been smoking for 30 years. So don't believe the hype is all I'm going to say. So when you walk into a place and they say, well, what kind of sticks do you smoke? If you know a brand that you love, go for it. I would recommend a Herrera Steli if you got a chance, right? The Undercrown is pretty good too, which is another Drew Estate stick. The Liga Privada, not one of my favorite Drew Estates. I think it's a little too heavy and way overpriced for the experience. But what you want to say when you walk in is, I want a full body, light strength cigar. And they should be able to hook you up with what you're looking for. Now, the beauty of it is you might walk into a place and the guy doesn't know anything about cigars, but he sells them. You better know your stuff before you walk into that. If you're stuck but you really want a cigar and it's the only place in town, just look at the wrapper and look for what's called the Connecticut wrapper. And without knowing which one's the Connecticut wrapper, it usually says it on the band or on the box. It's a really light wrapper. It's like it's sort of like the color of maybe a light paper bag that you would get at the grocery store back in the day. That's usually a Connecticut wrapper. 9 times out of 10, they're grown here in America too, those wrappers, which is kind of cool. So if you get a Connecticut wrapper, you will typically have if you don't know what you're buying and it's, say, under $10, you might be dealing with a short filler, which will burn a little bit quicker. Which if you're new, short fillers are great. You don't need to sit there for 2 hours until you figure out what you're going to do for 2 hours, right? I make a show when I smoke almost exclusively, except at night, where I do work. But that'll give you a generic tip about how to pick something out. Now, really super expensive cigars are, which would be anything over $20, you are almost unequivocally, unless you're getting scammed, it happens, but mainly for Cuban reasons, you will be dealing with a long filler, and size will matter because it will burn a really long time, because it'll be a long filler and it's super long size. Now, as I understand it, there's probably about 25 really popular, recognizable sizes and shapes that you'll see in the marketplace. Churchill is made by Winston Churchill. It's a very long cigar. It's one of the longest cigars out there. You have a Lancero, which is a very thin cigar, which is very long. In the Lancero, you have a slightly different profile because the wrapper plays a much bigger role in the overall amount of tobacco. Because it's really thin and really long, the amount of wrapper on the outside, instead of being 2% of a cigar's composition, might be 15-20% of the cigar's composition. So it matters at that point. Lanceros, people either love them or hate them. And it's only for one sort of lame reason, in that keeping them lit can be a chore if you're not steady on your pulse, because cigars will go out. If I put this cigar down right now at this length and that amount of burn, I can come back tomorrow, as long as I haven't gotten it wet overnight or something, and I can continue smoking this cigar. Now, most people don't put out cigars and pick them up the next day and smoke them. If you see that kind of habit, you're usually dealing with the rookie, or maybe on the complete flip side, a total expert. But because I've already started smoking this, I've already started pulling a lot of the ash soot through and into the cigar. So it's best that I go ahead and finish this, because tomorrow, if I light it back up again, I'm going to have that ashy flavor on top of the flavor profile. And because my mouth will probably be cleaner from any of the tobacco that I've been smoking up to this point on this particular session, it just won't taste that good. But right now I'm in the middle of all these flavors cascading around, and so continuing is the way to roll. I'm trying to make sure I got through all the basics here. I think I've done a fairly good job. Let me tell you my experience with Cuban cigars, since Cuba is getting freed up a little bit in terms of ridiculous ancient State Department sanctions. The first time I ever really started smoking cigars, I was actually selling them at a biker convention in Laughlin, Nevada. I had a couple guys come up to me and say if I had any Cubans. And I didn't, of course. And I said no. I said, but our seeds come from Cuba, and we've grown them in the New World, South America, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, that sort of thing. And they just walked away. I was like, oh, that's kind of shitty. What's up with this Cuban thing? And so I asked people about Cubans all the time because I didn't know. I was like, I'd never smoked one. Is it really that intense? And someone would say, no, it's a bunch of hype. And then some people would say, oh yeah, completely different experience. So I'm going to tell you the truth about Cubans here. I don't exactly know why this is such a profound thing, but Cuba is obviously its own little island there. But the shape of this island, the way the hills go up and down, and the precipitation that they get, and the soil that they have, having grown, I guess, tons of sugarcane for a while. As I understand, it's totally different regions on the island, but I can only assume that whatever was grown there before has had a profound effect on the way that tobacco tastes from Cuba. Because the truth of the matter is, a Cuban cigar tastes almost entirely different than all other cigars on planet Earth. And I mean, it is almost, you still get a tobacco flavor, don't get me wrong. But you get a taste that is just, in my opinion, it's just out of this world. And it's more of a subtle profile of sort of a hayish tobacco. It's sort of, you can get your leather and your woods and your beans and all that good stuff. But there's just this predominant mellow flavor on top of it, which is sort of a hayish tobacco. That's all I can describe to you. And I've smoked dozens and dozens and dozens of Cuban cigars. I mean, I've probably smoked over 150 Cuban cigars and probably have achieved, I would say, 20 different brands, I should say. I've smoked 1981 Davidoffs from Cuba. I mean, incredible. The key is a couple things here. If I flew to Cuba tomorrow and I picked up a whole bunch of Cubans and I flew back to your house and I said, dude, I got us some brand new Cubans, and I lay them out on the table, pick which one you want, and we smoke it. Now what's going to happen is you're going to go, oh yeah, that is different. That is really different. But if I took those Cubans and I put them in a humidor and properly took care of them for at least 2 years, and then came back 2 years later and I said, remember these? Like, oh yeah, I remember those. This is pretty good. Smoke this one. Wasn't it the same as the other one? It's 2 years old. And you smoke it. Completely different, amazing flavor. I mean, it's a similar profile in terms of its taste, but it's going to be more mellow, more amazing each year that goes by. Now, when you get the cigar to 10 years, all right, then you're talking about a flavor that is really unlike any flavor you'll ever get, and I dare say you will never get this flavor in any other cigar other than a Cuban. And that is what we call the medicinal bouquet. It's a sweet medicinal bouquet, which sounds awful, right? It sounds like you're going to be smoking a cough syrup. Not the case. Once you taste it inside of a Cuban, you can get teeny tiny hints of it in other cigars that are New World. But the medicinal flavor is something that once you taste it, and you usually get it through a retrohale. What I like to do with a Cuban that's really medicinal is smoke it inside a garage, so I don't have any wind throwing away all my beautiful foot smoke. I like to let it roll up my face and kind of go up into my nostrils and smell it. And you can have the tiniest gauge, a 42 ring gauge Cuban. It's probably no longer than, your half of your hand, right? Probably from my thumb is up to the top of my finger. It'll smoke for an hour and 45 minutes. Crazy. And you will just smoke this thing, and if you actually close the garage door and smoke it inside of a closed room, that's where you can get your garage to smell amazing. But you'll also just bathe in this amazing Cuban flavor that you just simply can't get anywhere in the world, right? Once you smoke a few Cubans, if you have the experience I'm talking about here, it'll be really difficult to go back to any other cigar. But you will go back to the old cheaper cigars and New World cigars. And believe me, there's beautiful New World cigars. Trust me. But you use that to wear down your palate away from the beautiful Cuban flavor. And you'll come back a week later, 2 days later, whatever, and drag your Cuban out. And all of a sudden you get to have that unique experience. Now, most cigar shops that have a lot of business to them, unless they're very special places, they won't have any aged anything inside their shop besides a crappy cigar they ain't selling. What's interesting about it is that, unlike a bad wine, which I'm not sure if this happens, but I don't think you can take a bad wine, age it, and it becomes good wine. Maybe you can. I haven't heard that happen before. No one's ever told me, oh, you got a shitty wine? We'll just keep it on the shelf for 5 years and then drink it after that. It'll be amazing. But that's what can happen to normal cigars that are a little too pungent, a little too strong. When you just let them mellow out for a little while, again, a couple of years, it's amazing. Now, a lot of cigar shops that have boxes of cigars, unless, again, they're super duper popular by name, they will be in that box. If you go to the bottom, or you go to the box and there's just a couple sticks on the bottom, you might be technically smoking a stick that's 2 years old. That's what happens with my Herrera Esteli. There's only one place in town that sells them, and I'm the one guy that buys the most of them. So by the time I get to the bottom of the box, it's about a year and a half later, because they smoke other things too, The other big thing is you'll hear guys say, stay ashy. And there's a big religion about the ash and how long the ash can stay on the cigar before falling off. Having talked to a lot of guys that have smoked for decades and decades and decades, I will tell you that none of them play the ash game. They look at that as a absolute sign of utter rookiness. And I have to agree with them, to be honest. Now, what we typically do is try to let it get about half an inch on there, because it does hold the cherry on real well, and it keeps the thing more razor sharp burn, right? But some guys will try to hang on to this ash for inches and inches and inches, and then they'll post photographs of it really long. And hey man, if that's fun for you, then just get into it and enjoy it, because it doesn't hurt anybody's experience around you. But I wouldn't throw that out there as you're an expert if you hang on to your ash. I think it's just something that kind of became a game that people play. In the end, people who try to play the ash game are covered in ashes, because they will hang on till it drops on their lap, and then you have this soot on your body, which you can't always completely wipe off, and you can also carry the cherry with it, and here comes this ball of fire with the ash, right? I've got scars on my body from firing guns and smoking cigars at the same time, and not realizing that the concussion from my gun is knocking the ash off. I didn't feel it, but it's on my arm. It's burning a hole in me. And so I've got some loving scars from weaponry and cigars mixed together. Now, in terms of brands that you might be interested in, it's really tough. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of brands that are folded under dozens and dozens of manufacturers, of cigar makers. Some of the there are some that are just great staples out there, and there's some that are sort of blown out of proportion, which is sort of sad, because they get more expensive the more that people blow them out of proportion, because it's just a supply and demand thing. Rocky Patel, it makes probably some of the best cigars in the world under $10, and just around $10 or a little bit over. Now, all brands make really expensive versions too, so I'm just trying to give you some options if you're starting out. Again, I think anything Drew Estate's pretty good. Again, Liga Privada starts about $17 where I live, and I've had a couple, and they're just not $17 worth of my time. I'll tell you that right now. Padrones are extremely popular, but Padrones are really popular like the tequila Patron. It gets to a point where it's such a hyped up brand that you really have to be careful with how much you pay for it. Padron makes some amazing stuff, $20 and over, and they make some great stuff down towards the $10 mark. Fuente is almost always an excellent experience. Fuentes are typically smoked a little bit drier than other cigars, depending on where you buy them. The place where I smoke on a daily basis likes all of his cigars very dry, and he's a Fuente addict. Fuente also makes something called the Opus X, and the Opus X is the key brand reference, and then they have all different types of Opus X's. The Opus X is a really unique experience. They're usually about $20 minimum, usually about $30, just so that you know. But it's like smoking a fruit cake. It's got raisins in it, and it doesn't have raisins in it, but it tastes like you're smoking a fruitcake. It's just got all kinds of wild flavors, and I know most of you would go, yuck, that sounds gross. But coming through the overall signature of tobacco, all these wild flavors are tremendous. The other thing you can do to figure out whether or not you like a cigar or not is not to buy it, but sit next to someone who's smoking it and smell their foot smoke or their exhale, usually their foot smoke. And if you like the foot smoke, then the chances are you're going to be a lot more prone to like the cigar itself. A couple other great brands is Punch. Punch usually makes a pretty good brand they make a lot of amazing cigars. Down towards the $10 mark, a Punch will get actually pretty darn strong. It's at least a medium to a full body cigar, full strength cigar. It's, in my opinion, they've been fairly monotone with body. Whatever signature you get about an inch into the cigar is what it's going to be like all the way to the bottom. Macanudo is another great Connecticut cigar to start out with. They're a little overpriced. I don't want to say overpriced, but they're $9 to $10 here. They used to be cheaper before California got its extra ridiculous tax on them. But it is a very solid stick. It has a bit of what we call pepper. Pepper you will find not in the Herrera Steli, but when you smoke a cigar and you pull away and you let the smoke out and your mouth is ringing, almost like you bit down on a black pepper. Not pepper as in, chilies that you might cook with, but like a black pepper. When you start feeling that ringing in your mouth, as I'm told, it's one of the cheaper flavors that a cigar blender can give you. So in terms of the cost that it takes to create the pepper taste, it's a lot less. But a Macanudo has got a beautiful balance of just beginner's low strength cigar. You would have to work pretty fast to get yourself high on a Macanudo. And again, the more you smoke it quickly, if you're a cigarette smoker and you move to cigars, you might be prone to take drags way too often, and then that's just going to increase your blood sugar level displacement. You might get a little high. Slow down. Eat some sugar, get yourself balanced out. Again, always smoke on a full stomach if you can. Even if you just squeeze down a hot dog before you eat, before you smoke, it's the way to go. But the Macanudo is a great one. Romeo and Juliet, one of the oldest brands in the world. They make Cubans, they make New World cigars. You almost can't go wrong with Romeo and Juliet until you get around $6. You get some gigantic cigars for $6 in the Romeo and Juliet realm. Just know you're going to have less body, less variance. You won't get 3 transitions in the cigar, except to say towards the end, the cigar gets usually really heavy. So it's a really strange thing that Romeo and Juliet, it would almost be like sort of like Piaget Polo, who makes a $50,000 watch, also makes a $5 watch. And you would kind of ask yourself, why do you even make this $5 watch? It kind of insults your brand. That's sort of where Romeo and Juliet is, because their Cubans are utterly phenomenal cigars. Just pick any one of them, and they're just, you can close your eyes and pick any Cuban cigar in general, usually. What I have found to be pretty consistent is the following. Similar to wine, similar. The more money you spend, the better the cigar. The more that the full body guarantee shows up for business. Now, again, the cheaper cigars will typically be randomly full strength cigars, which will kind of put you off your game. You'd be like, man, I was going to get into cigars. I smoked this $5 stick or $6 stick, and I was so nauseous, it was gross. Just understand that would be the same thing as you drinking a $2 Chuck and coming away with a headache because of all the crazy, aluminum aging that they do, where they, I don't know if you know this about wine, but real wine, which is pretty much $35 and over, is always aged in wood, in a wood barrel. Under that, they do what's called aluminum barrel aging, where they take wood, they burn it. They literally burn the wood, and they stick that burned wood, just like out of your fireplace, not the ashes, but the logs itself, they're all black. They stick it inside the wine, inside the aluminum barrel. It does a rapid fire aging to make it taste woody. Then they strain it, trying to get out all those toxins and the carcinogens from the wood. And in the end, it's not filtered very well, and you get these horrible headaches because your body's just rejecting it completely. Diabetics aren't allowed to drink wine under $35 because the way that the sugar is fermented and added to the wine is too sugary in the end. But they can drink all day a $75 bottle of wine without having any type of insulin shock. Now, let's say you get into this, you dig it, but your loved ones are like, Dad or honey, you smell like crap. I don't like your breath. I don't like the way you smell after. I can smell it on you. Here's the bummer. Here's the bummer about it. When you're sitting next to someone smoking at a smoke lounge, you will love the foot smoke coming off their cigar as long as they're smoking something decent, and they will enjoy yours, and they'll go buy your cigar and smoke it right in front of you right after you teach them that your foot smoke smells great, and the vice versa. But if you were sitting in there and you finished your cigar and everyone else stopped smoking, you got an ashtray next to you, if you can smell the quaff off the ashtray, it's gross. It's just like an ashtray for a cigarette. It smells gross. Nothing good about it at all. What you need to understand is that the ambient smell off of your body can smell very ashy to someone who didn't smoke with you. That's why you stink to them. They have none of the taste profile in their mouth, in their nose. They're not getting anything else out of the experience. Remember, we can't taste unless we have functional nose follicles that can do it, right? So we're getting this huge profile in here, and they're not. Okay. So if you got to reset yourself for your family such that you don't smell awful, I will warn you that there's almost nothing you can do to get yourself completely clear unless you were to smoke perhaps like a Macanudo or any type of Connecticut wrapper that barely has any flavor on it. That way you don't have a lot of soot inside your mouth and your nose. But you're going to have to come home, take a shower, wash your hair, switch out your clothes. Depending on how tolerant your spouse is, you may have to put those clothes directly in the washing machine to get them away from any other smell in the bedroom or wherever the hell you keep your dirty clothes. You're going to have to brush your teeth. You have to brush the crap out of your teeth, and most importantly, double, triple, quadruple brush your tongue. Remember, your tongue goes back quite a ways, and so a lot of those taste buds are on the little mound right before it goes down your throat. You need to rub those things out with your toothbrush. You might gag a few times as you get the rest of that crap out there. If you look at your toothbrush, you're going to see brown on the toothbrush. The bummer is you're enjoying the flavor of all this, and now you're wiping it out of your mouth, which is just the price you pay sometimes. But there are two places that the smoke hides that are a little tougher to get to. One is up inside your nasal canal. Unless you've got a nasal rinse and you're familiar with using that, you're going to carry around a lot of the soot up inside your nose. But the one place you're not going to be able to clean out is your lungs. You got a little bit of dust of this in your lungs. what you will find is if you can stay fairly, and if you eat a meal fairly soon after you do all this other ritual, you'll be pretty much 90% clean. But you got 10% down inside your lungs. If you do something that makes you breathe fast, people will smell it off of you. All right? I'll let you imagine what that could be. You could be really close to someone, breathing fast, and they're going to go, whoa, what is that smell? That's horrible. You're lucky if your spouse likes the smell of cigars. All right? If your spouse smokes cigarettes, usually there's... Well, I can tell you this. I've dated people that smoke cigarettes, and they do not like the smell of cigars. It's just really unfortunate. Cigars will mellow you out. They take your thought process that may be agitated, and it harmonizes it into a long wave, is what I like to say. So one of the reasons why I enjoy smoking cigars while doing this show is it helps my particular visual memory mechanisms really just smooth out. I have like a photo album of everything I'm thinking about right there, and new photos can be introduced sort of gnostically from the universe to say, oh, don't forget this, don't forget that, and it's really pretty phenomenal. When I do an episode without smoking a cigar, which I do every once in a while, it's a little tougher to keep my thoughts perfectly in track if I get interrupted. If I don't get interrupted, it's okay. So for the similar reasons that people smoke cigarettes to get calm, although that's a more frantic, quick pull on a cigarette, cigars will have its own functionality, right? Now, the disclaimer is obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can be allergic to certain substances in your body. And what that means is your body's going to try to reject it on a level that may make you feel sick. And it may actually metabolize into something else. Again, anything that isn't indigenous to your body is potentially a carcinogen, right? So you just need to smoke carefully and see if it's having any ill effects. If you get rashes or something, or get really itchy or something, you may have an allergic reaction to tobacco. You may actually have allergic reactions to some cigars and not to others, because of the way it's manufactured is a little looser, and it's just like a bad wine. It gives you a headache, and a good wine, you don't have a hangover. It's tremendous, right? So you're going to have to find where your body is most compatible with the cigar. We have George Burns, who lived to be 100. I think he smoked up to about 96. When you get older, you really need all the oxygen you can get. But, living to 100 is pretty good. Bob Hope did the same thing. Castro smoked till I think he was 95, 96. He lived to be 100, I think, right? So you have all these guys, Winston Churchill. These guys smoked dozens of cigars a day. And they did not drop dead of cancer. So if there's any direct association, it's got to be related to your body's ability to have tobacco in its bloodstream and not cause any issues. Again, cigarettes are just packed with all kinds of toxins. You're smoking paper, not a natural substance, right? Cigars will become, if you get into them, they become an item of it's a nostalgic process. But again, if 300 people touch the average cigar, even a It's a Boy, right, which is the super cheap cigar that you can buy at the grocery store, which is pretty awful. 300 people touch a cigar, then more people have touched a cigar than any of the finest wines in the world, So they become sort of little works of art in your brain. If they taste good, then the whole experience is homogeneous with itself, right? It's beautiful. Now, the other thing, too, since I'm getting to the last couple inches of this cigar that I'm going to smoke, when I was sometimes put it this way, you get a great cigar, it tastes great all the way down to half an inch. That's beautiful. But a lot of cigars, to no fault of their own, when they get down to the last inch and a half, the amount of tobacco, again, is really hot, which is not necessarily a pleasant experience anymore. The amount of sort of sooty, intense doubling up of all the flavor profiles can get sort of unpleasant. Don't be afraid to go ahead and throw it on the ground, Because what'll happen is if you over smoke a cigar where you've kind of reached the point where you're just doing it because it cost you $10 or more, you will leave yourself with sort of a negative experience at the end. Now, if you're trying to quit, go right to the bottom and it will start kicking your ass and you'll get out of it. But when I first heard about throwing away a cigar at the band, I was just so confused. And now it completely makes sense to me. Just understand, if you go all the way down to the bottom, you could be left with a flavor you're not really that happy with. All right? As far as cosmetic changes to your body, I make it a habit to wash my face after a day of smoking. So every day before I go to bed, I just take soap and water, wash my face off completely, all the way down to my neck and all that stuff, because I don't like all that soot on my skin, because it can cause little tiny pimples all over your skin. Not the kind of pimples you had when you were a kid, but just these really weird surface pimples. And if you continually allow that to be on your face every single day, all the way through the night, your skin will start looking shitty. So make sure you cleanse your face. In fact, you'll find out that I found out that little ritual before bed makes me more sleepy. It's really interesting. But now the other thing that you can do that you have to be careful, and women will tell you this who smoke cigarettes, is that when people get Botox injections to deaden various muscle groups in their face such that they don't have any wrinkles in their face, right? Makes them young, supple looking, right? When you pucker up and you pull on a cigar, right, you are puckering a bunch of muscles in your mouth region, which is one of the most complex muscle groups in your face, in fact, in your whole body, right? You will build up muscles almost like you build up your biceps. The only problem is that if you were to look at the anatomy of all the muscles in your mouth, especially on the exterior part, you're going to have grooves between muscles. And so you'll start getting crow's feet, is what they call it, right? Around your mouth. Now, women get that a little bit faster than men with cigarettes. Men can get it with cigars just as well, right? I've got a little muscle in my lower left lip, I think it is, that it indents when I pull on a cigar. Now, that didn't exist a couple years ago when I didn't smoke. And so I track that in my own mind to make sure, if I were to ever start looking like a dried up potato, I would have to make a choice as to whether I'm going to ever be able to recover and whether I'm going to continue smoking at all, right? Your genetics will ultimately determine how that affects you, right? But I think overall, get the smoke off your face regardless, and you'll thank your lucky stars. I know guys that smoke 5 cigars a day, and their face is just covered with this crazy, inhuman texture. And I think it's because they don't wash their face. And if you smoke that much in one day, you should probably be washing your face 3 or 4 times a day. So, and the other thing that men don't really think about much, which women remind us from time to time, usually soaps are pretty abrasive to your skin. They take away a lot of oils that should exist on your face. So you might grab a little bit of your wife's face, skin lotion or whatever meant for the face, and re-moisturize your face a little bit where you might have dry skin because you're overwashing your face. Typically, when you get older, the oil on your skin will reduce with age, and so you'll need to add some of that stuff anyway. So don't be stupid. Don't be all macho. It's all right to look tough, but let that be a natural process and not something you accelerate, right? I think that's about all I have. I wanted to put this in a really clean episode. I think I'm going to ask my friend Dave to re-record the one that we did together because it's just a little too chaotic. We're getting a groove on. I always forget when I'm interviewing someone there's a certain tone that I have to maintain that I didn't maintain in that particular episode, so we'll get that reshot here. But anyway, deepthoughtsradio.com for all the other shows that aren't about cigars. I thought, I'm getting enough questions about this. I want to make this laser focused on what you need to know so you can get in and out really quickly and make your decision. Again, you could try it and hate it. You could hate it and never try it. At least you'll know more information about it, because there's nothing more emasculating than walking into a situation where when smoking cigars and you have no knowledge of how these things work. Because that was me about 8 years ago. It was just like a pup. And the thing was really crazy is no one sat me down and taught me anything. It really sucked. The very first time I ever learned anything about cigars was Brian Glenn's Cigar Obsession show on YouTube, which is an excellent show as well to get kind of the just thousands of cigar reviews that he has. Now, he has a palate that's sort of off the charts in terms of tasting things. So if you agree with what he says he tastes, then watch all his cigars. But if nothing else, you'll learn a lot from him. My buddy Dave has a great show, which I'll link down below, which he reviews unicorns, cigars that you and I may never see in our lifetime. I did want to say, just before I totally sign off here, there are a really small group of cigars, even Cubans, that are machine rolled. Very rare. I've only had a couple from Dave, and they're beautiful. They're just as great as other cigars, but there's nothing like a hand rolled cigar, period. The machine rolled cigars are usually pretty small in gauge, ring gauge. I haven't seen a really big one. So, if you find one, don't totally crap on it. It could be a great cigar, but once you fall in love with handmade things, you tend to stay with them, right? Like I said, deepthoughtsradio.com for all the feeds. There's video if you're on audio if you're on video. Your audio choices are iTunes, Google Play, and just the website to get the RSS feed into your telephone. Don't try to go on your desktop computer. That won't work. Your video choices are youtube.com and vid.me, which is a brand new series out there. I tried Vimeo, but they want to charge me a bunch of money. So, goodbye, Vimeo. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else. Have a good smoke, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.